It all started with a simple suggestion from Arthur Weasley. The enthusiastic Muggle-obsessed wizard had been pestering Dumbledore for years about bringing Hogwarts into the modern era, but no one had taken him seriously until now. After a heated debate in the staff room, the decision was made. Hogwarts would finally get Wi-Fi. The moment the internet was installed, everything changed. At first, students were hesitant, unsure how to use laptops and phones, but it didn't take long for curiosity to take over. Within hours, every common room was buzzing with excitement. Harry and Ron sat in the Gryffindor common room, staring at the glowing screen in front of them. "So, what exactly do we do with this?" Ron asked, nudging the laptop with his wand. Hermione rolled her eyes. "It's not a magical artifact, Ron. It's a computer. You type in whatever you want to know, and it gives you answers." Ron leaned closer. "So, it's like a talking book?" "Sort of," Hermione said, clicking on a search bar. "But much more advanced." Harry watched in fascination as she typed Hogwarts into a search engine. A second later, hundreds of results popped up. His eyes widened. "Wait, there's information about us online?" Hermione frowned. "This isn't just information, Harry. There are whole books written about us. Look, there's even a website where people argue about whether magic is real or not." Ron glanced over her shoulder. "Blimey, they think we're just a story." He scrolled down and suddenly let out a strangled noise. "Wait a second, what's this?" Hermione leaned in, her face going pale. "Fanfiction." She clicked on a link, only to slam the laptop shut a second later. Nope. Absolutely not." Harry raised an eyebrow. "What was that?" "You don't want to know." Meanwhile, the rest of the castle was quickly descending into chaos. The Ravenclaws had already mastered the internet, with Luna Lovegood setting up a blog about magical creatures that may or may not exist. The Slytherins, on the other hand, were using it for a very different purpose. Draco Malfoy smirked as he scrolled through a forum. "Interesting. There's an entire website dedicated to debating whether I'm better than Potter." Pansy Parkinson giggled. "Obviously, they know the answer." Blaise Zabini peered over his shoulder. "Not really. Most people are saying Potter actually did things while you just complained about him." Draco slammed the laptop shut. "This is rigged." Down in the dungeons, Professor Snape was already regretting the decision to introduce technology. His once-feared potions classroom was now filled with students who were more interested in their screens than in brewing elixirs. "Mr. Finnegan," Snape drawled, his patience wearing thin, "would you care to explain why you are not focusing on your potion?" Seamus quickly minimized a tab. I was just looking up different ways to improve my mixture, Professor." Snape narrowed his eyes. With a flick of his wand, the laptop flew out of Seamus's hands and hovered in front of him. His expression darkened as he read the screen. "Seamus Finnegan tries to set fire to his cauldron. Gone wrong? You were watching Muggle prank videos." Seamus swallowed hard. Technically, it is potion-related." Snape's glare could have melted a cauldron. Detention. But the true disaster came at dinner. The great hall, once filled with lively conversation, was now eerily silent. Students sat hunched over their devices, barely acknowledging their food. Some were watching Muggle films, others were scrolling endlessly, and a few had even discovered social media. Dumbledore stroked his beard, watching the scene with quiet amusement. "Fascinating," he mused. "It seems the internet has taken over." McGonagall, on the other hand, looked ready to hex someone. "Albus, we need to put a stop to this. Students are skipping their studies to engage in something called TikTok." Dumbledore nodded sagely. "Ah yes, a most powerful distraction indeed." Just as McGonagall was about to demand an immediate ban, a loud caw echoed through the hall. She turned, her eyes narrowing at Ron Weasley, who was holding a brightly colored parrot. "Mr. Weasley," she said in a dangerously calm voice, "why is there a parrot at the dinner table?" Ron grinned sheepishly. "It's this thing called Amazon. You click a button and things just show up." The bird flapped its wings. 10 points from Gryffindor. 10 points from Gryffindor." McGonagall inhaled sharply. "Merlin, help us." Meanwhile, in the far corner of the great hall, Fred and George were grinning mischievously as they scrolled through online shopping sites. "So," Fred whispered, "you're telling me we can order Muggle prank supplies and have them delivered straight to Hogwarts?" George nodded. Looks like it. Fred smirked. Brilliant. Let's buy everything. And just like that, the internet at Hogwarts had opened a door that no one would be able to close. The chaos only escalated in the following days. The internet had spread through the castle like a wildfire, consuming every aspect of student life. Homework was forgotten, spell practice abandoned, and even Quidditch matches had fewer spectators. Instead of flying on broomsticks, students were too busy watching Muggle YouTube videos of people pretending to fly on broomsticks. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat in the Gryffindor common room, each staring at their own screens. Ron had become obsessed with something called online shopping, ordering bizarre Muggle items with no idea how to use them. This thing is called a Roomba, he said, holding up a small, circular device. He placed it on the floor, and it began whirring to life, rolling across the common room. Muggles use it to clean. Hermione looked unimpressed. Or you could just use a scouring charm. But Ron wasn't listening. He was too busy laughing as the Roomba crashed into the wall and spun in circles. Brilliant. This is way better than magic. Harry sighed, scrolling through his phone. He had made the unfortunate mistake of looking himself up on something called Twitter. Why are there so many people debating whether I should have ended up with Hermione? Ron blinked. Wait, what? He grabbed the phone and read aloud. Harry and Hermione had way more chemistry. J.K. Rowling ruined it. #Harmony forever. Hermione groaned. I hate the internet. Down in the Slytherin common room, Draco Malfoy had discovered an entirely new use for the internet, trolling. Watch this, he smirked, typing furiously. He had joined a Quidditch forum under the username Best Seeker Ever, and was currently arguing with complete strangers. Oi, Zabini! I just told some bloke that Potter only won the House Cup because Dumbledore played favorites. Pansy snickered. What did they say? Draco leaned back smugly. They called me a liar and a salty snake 97. Blaise frowned. Wait, Malfoy, do you even know who you're arguing with? Draco waved a hand dismissively. Some random nobody. Blaise glanced at the screen. His eyes widened. Malfoy, you're arguing with Oliver Wood. Draco paled. He quickly logged out. Meanwhile, in the dungeons, Snape's patience was wearing dangerously thin. His once disciplined classroom had turned into absolute mayhem. Mr. Longbottom, he said, his voice low and threatening. Why is your cauldron smoking? Neville glanced up sheepishly. Air. I was following a tutorial. Snape's eye twitched. A what? A YouTube tutorial, Neville explained. It said if I added extra Boomslong skin, the potion would work faster. Snape's expression darkened. With a flick of his wand, the laptop in front of Neville floated into the air. He scanned the screen, then sneered. Neville, you imbecile. You were watching a Muggle cooking channel. Neville blinked. Wait, this isn't how you make soup. The cauldron suddenly exploded. But the true disaster arrived that evening. Dumbledore had called for an emergency staff meeting. The Great Hall was silent, with every professor seated at the long table, looking thoroughly exhausted. McGonagall rubbed her temples. We need to put a stop to this. Flitwick nodded. My students refuse to practice charms because they keep saying they can just look them up online. Hagrid groaned. And half the first years got lost in the Forbidden Forest trying to catch Pokemon. Dumbledore, however, simply sipped his tea. Perhaps we should embrace this change rather than resist it. McGonagall stared at him in disbelief. Albus, the house elves are on strike because the students keep ordering fast food. Just then, the doors to the Great Hall burst open, and Ron Weasley ran in, panting heavily. Professor, he gasped. It's urgent. The school's under attack. Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. By whom? Ron gulped. A horde of Amazon delivery owls. At that moment, a deafening whoosh filled the air. Hundreds, if not thousands, of owls swarmed into the Great Hall, dropping off packages at an alarming rate. Students screamed as boxes rained from the ceiling. Fred and George, however, were cackling as they caught packages midair. I think we ordered too much, George admitted. Fred grinned. Nah, just enough. As the professors ducked for cover, McGonagall turned to Dumbledore with a glare so sharp it could cut glass. This, she hissed, is your fault. The Amazon owl invasion had left the castle in ruins. Packages piled up in the Great Hall, blocking entrances and covering the enchanted ceiling. House elves, furious at the sheer amount of Muggle food deliveries, had gone on strike, leaving students to fend for themselves. And yet, despite the absolute chaos, Hogwarts students had discovered something even more dangerous than online shopping: social media. It started with the Gryffindors. Seamus Finnegan had stumbled across a website called Instagram and decided it was time to introduce the wizarding world to the concept of flexing. "Oi, Dean," he called, positioning himself in front of the Hogwarts Express. "Take a picture of me with this caption. Just another day at the most legendary school on Earth. Hashtag wizard life." Dean sighed but snapped the photo anyway. Seamus spent the next hour obsessing over the number of likes. But then the Slytherins caught on. Draco Malfoy, always one to be ahead of the trends, quickly realized the power of influence. "Crab Goyle," he ordered, slicking back his hair and standing in front of the Slytherin common room. "Take a picture of me looking mysterious with the caption, 'Born to lead, forced to attend classes.' Hashtag pureblood aesthetic." Pansy clapped her hands. "Oh, Draco, that's brilliant." Soon, the Great Hall was filled with students posing dramatically for social media. Hufflepuffs were posting wholesome group selfies with captions like "hard work, loyalty, and snacks." Hashtag Hufflepuff pride. While Ravenclaws had started an online debate over whether intelligence could be measured by Hogwarts house rankings. But the real madness began when Fred and George Weasley discovered TikTok. "All right, George," Fred whispered, holding up a small Muggle device. "We're about to change the game." The twins had spent hours watching Muggle trends, and they had one goal: to go viral. Their first video? A simple prank where they bewitched a Slytherin's robes to flash neon colors, while the victim remained completely unaware. The moment they posted it, the views skyrocketed. "Mate," George said in awe, staring at the screen. "We're famous." Fred grinned. "And I have an idea to take this even further." The next day, students awoke to find Hogwarts transformed into a social media battleground. Gryffindors were pulling pranks for online clout, Slytherins were staging dramatic duels for engagement, and Hufflepuffs had formed an entire online community dedicated to positivity and study tips. Even the professors weren't safe. Professor McGonagall was horrified when she discovered a video of herself had gone viral. "What is this?" she demanded, holding up a phone. Hermione peered at the screen and sighed. "It's called McGonagall's Best Angry Moments. It has 5 million views." McGonagall's nostrils flared. Who is responsible for this? At the far end of the Great Hall, Fred and George were too busy laughing at their latest post to notice her glare. Meanwhile, Snape had become an accidental social media icon. A mysterious user had been posting clips of his sarcastic remarks under the title #SavageSnape, and students were now secretly recording his classes in hopes of capturing his next brutal insult. Draco Malfoy, determined to outshine the Gryffindors in social media fame, decided it was time for drastic measures. He gathered his followers in the Slytherin common room. "Listen up," he declared, pacing back and forth. "If we want to prove that Slytherins run this school, we need to do something big. Something unforgettable." Blaise raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Draco smirked. "We're going to start the biggest online Hogwarts prank war in history." And just like that, the digital chaos at Hogwarts had reached new heights. The Hogwarts prank war began with a single video. Draco Malfoy, determined to cement Slytherin as the dominant social media force, orchestrated a grand prank against Gryffindor. At breakfast, the Great Hall was packed as students scrolled through their feeds. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the hall, and every Gryffindor's robes turned a dazzling shade of neon pink. Laughter erupted as a video popped up online. Malfoy smirking at the camera, a simple caption below. "Consider this a declaration of war. Hashtag Slytherin supremacy. Asterisk." Ron gawked at his bright pink sleeves. "What the bloody hell?" Harry, eyes narrowed, pulled out his phone. "All right, Malfoy. You want war? You got it." Hermione sighed, rubbing her temples. "This is the dumbest thing I've ever witnessed." Fred and George, however, were thrilled. "This," Fred whispered, eyes gleaming, "is the greatest thing to ever happen at Hogwarts." George nodded. Time to show these amateurs how pranking is really done. Gryffindor retaliated that very afternoon. While Malfoy and his Slytherin crew strutted down the corridor, basking in their victory, a loud pop echoed around them. Draco's robes vanished. A horrified gasp spread through the hallway as Malfoy stood there, clad in nothing but bright green boxers covered in tiny Potter faces. The video went viral instantly. Caption: Nice undies, Malfoy. Hashtag Gryffindor strikes back. Asterisk. Slytherin was furious. Blaise Zabini cracked his knuckles. They think that's funny? We'll show them funny. By the next morning, every Gryffindor bed had been hexed. The moment anyone tried to lie down, they were catapulted into the air, landing face first on the floor. The Hufflepuffs tried to stay out of it, but unfortunately, the war didn't spare the innocent. During herbology, Cedric Diggory was about to trim a venomous tentacula when his entire body turned into a disco ball. Glitter rained from the sky. A magical voice echoed. Hufflepuff, you have been officially pranked. Hashtag collateral damage. Asterisk. Cedric sighed, looking at his shimmering reflection. Well, this is unfortunate. Meanwhile, Ravenclaws had taken an entirely different approach. Instead of engaging in physical pranks, they resorted to psychological warfare. Cho Chang posted a cryptic message online. Something weird is happening in the castle tonight. You'll see. Nothing actually happened that night, but by morning, half the school was paranoid, convinced that some terrible prank was coming. It's genius, Terry Boot whispered, watching students nervously glance over their shoulders. We don't even have to do anything. But Gryffindor wasn't done. Fred and George had been planning their masterpiece. That evening, as students gathered in the Great Hall for dinner, the enchanted ceiling flickered. And suddenly, a giant talking projection of Snape's most embarrassing moments appeared. There was Snape, tripping over his own robes. Snape sneezing mid-lecture. Snape getting startled by a rogue bat. The students lost it. The final clip? A dramatic slow-motion close-up of Snape's infamous eye roll with the caption, Potter. Again. Hashtag tired professor. Asterisk. Snape's face darkened to the color of an overripe tomato. With a furious swish of his wand, the projection vanished and his cold voice rang through the hall. Detention. For everyone. The Hogwarts prank war was over. And no one won. Detention at Hogwarts had always been unpleasant, but this time, it was personal. Snape had never looked angrier, and McGonagall was so furious that even the Weasley twins looked nervous. The prank war had left the castle in absolute disarray. Students hexed, trust shattered, and poor Professor Flitwick still stuck to the ceiling of his classroom because someone thought it would be funny to enchant his chair. Dumbledore, however, remained as serene as ever, watching the chaos unfold with his usual twinkle-eyed amusement. Perhaps, he finally said, it is time for some regulations. And just like that, Hogwarts was hit with the most dreaded punishment imaginable. The Great Digital Crackdown. McGonagall was the first to act. With a single, powerful incantation, she placed a strict restriction on the school's Wi-Fi. Only academic research and school-approved content shall be accessible, she declared. The entire castle screamed in collective horror. No more TikTok? Seamus wailed. No more Quidditch highlight compilations? Cried a devastated Oliver Wood. Even the Slytherins, who prided themselves on being composed, looked horrified. Pansy clutched Draco's arm. What are we supposed to do in our free time? Read books. But McGonagall wasn't finished. She turned to Snape, who stepped forward with a sneer and held up a glowing, enchanted parchment. This, he drawled, is a list of students who have participated in the recent buffoonery. Each of you will be assigned a special punishment to ensure you never waste your time in such a manner again. The punishments were brutal. Fred and George were forced to write a 1,000-page essay on why pranks are detrimental to magical education. They tried to bribe their way out of it, but McGonagall quadrupled the word count when she caught them. Draco Malfoy, humiliated from the underwear incident, was sentenced to a full month of assisting Madame Pomfrey in the hospital wing. By the end of the first week, he had memorized every healing spell and vowed never to prank another Gryffindor again. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had it the worst. They were tasked with managing the restricted Hogwarts internet firewall. This, Hermione explained, adjusting her prefect badge proudly, means we get to decide what students are allowed to access. Ron groaned. Brilliant. We've gone from being heroes to internet moderators. But no one suffered more than Snape. Despite his best efforts, Savage Snape was now an unstoppable meme. No matter how many times he threatened students, more and more clips surfaced. The final straw was when he discovered fan edits. Dramatic videos set to music, making him look like the most terrifying yet weirdly attractive professor at Hogwarts. Who is responsible for this? Snape bellowed one morning as he stormed into the Great Hall. Draco, looking awkwardly guilty, muttered, "Air the entire internet, sir." Hogwarts had been changed forever, but one thing was certain. This digital revolution was far from over. The great digital crackdown had turned Hogwarts into a nightmare. The internet, once a source of endless entertainment, was now a barren wasteland of school-approved research articles, boring wizarding news, and an inexplicable number of Ministry of Magic propaganda videos. Fred and George's TikTok account had been permanently banned. Draco's influencer dreams were shattered. And worst of all, Quidditch memes were now considered unauthorized content. But Hogwarts students weren't about to accept this oppression. It started with the Ravenclaws. "You realize," Terry Boot whispered to Anthony Goldstein, "McGonagall only blocked the Wi-Fi. She didn't disable the network itself." Anthony's eyes widened. "Are you saying?" Terry nodded. "We can hack our way back in." And just like that, the underground internet rebellion was born. The Ravenclaws worked tirelessly in the Room of Requirement, turning it into a hidden tech hub. Using a mix of advanced charms, Muggle hacking techniques, and one highly illegal enchanted router smuggled in by a Hufflepuff, they created a secret Hogwarts internet. One that was completely untraceable. They called it Hognet. Word spread quickly. Fred and George were the first to join, immediately reviving their banned TikTok account under a new alias. Marauder Legacy, *. Slytherins, desperate to regain their influencer status, formed an elite social media ring dedicated to reclaiming Hogwarts' online fame. Even Neville Longbottom got involved. "I just want my plant care forums back," he admitted. But the biggest challenge? Keeping it secret from the professors. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were technically in charge of enforcing the internet restrictions. But as soon as they discovered Hognet, "Well," Harry said, casually logging into the Hogwarts Quidditch memes page, "it's not our fault if we don't notice anything suspicious." Ron grinned. "Exactly. What crackdown?" Hermione sighed but didn't argue. For a while, the rebellion thrived. Students were back online, the memes were stronger than ever, and Hogwarts felt like Hogwarts again. But then disaster struck. One evening, while Blaise Zabini was uploading a Slytherins-only podcast, the entire network crashed. The enchanted router fried itself. Sparks flew. Smoke filled the Room of Requirement. And before anyone could react, the door burst open. Professor McGonagall stood there, arms crossed, looking absolutely furious. Her eyes scanned the room. The secret computers, the enchanted devices, the guilty faces. "Would someone," she said in an icy voice, "care to explain?" Hogwarts' underground internet rebellion had just been busted. McGonagall's glare alone was enough to send shivers down every student's spine. The Room of Requirement was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the dying sparks of the fried enchanted router. Fred and George subtly tried to shove their laptops behind their backs. Draco Malfoy adjusted his collar, attempting to look less guilty. Terry Boot looked like he was already calculating the best escape routes. But there was no escaping McGonagall. "An underground internet network?" she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Hognet." No one dared to speak. Even Fred and George, normally the kings of smooth talking, remained frozen. McGonagall exhaled sharply and straightened her robes. "Very well. Since none of you will confess, we shall take this matter directly to the headmaster." A collective groan swept through the room. "Oh, brilliant," Ron muttered. "Now we're really doomed." Dumbledore's judgment. The students were marched to Dumbledore's office like prisoners being led to Azkaban. McGonagall looked utterly unimpressed, while Snape, who had joined halfway through, looked smug. "They should be expelled," he sneered. "Or, at the very least, banned from ever touching a Muggle device again." Dumbledore, however, simply twiddled his thumbs and gazed at the students over his half-moon glasses. "Expulsion seems excessive," he mused. "After all, creativity and innovation are traits we should encourage." McGonagall shot him a look. "Albus, they created a secret internet." "And isn't that fascinating?" Dumbledore smiled. "The fusion of magic and technology. What a truly remarkable achievement. Snape scowled. Headmaster. Dumbledore held up a hand. I believe a suitable punishment is in order, but one that does not stifle their ingenuity. He turned to the students, eyes twinkling. From now on, if you wish to access the internet, you must do so under the supervision of the Hogwarts faculty. A long silence. Wait, Draco blinked. So, you're saying we can still use it? Dumbledore's smile widened. With a few minor restrictions, of course. The new order of Hogwarts Internet. And just like that, Hogwarts Internet was reborn. But this time, every website and online activity had to be approved by the professors. Snape personally monitored online discussions, deducting house points for any mention of Hogwarts gossip. Another Savage Snape post? That's 10 points from Gryffindor. Flitwick enjoyed moderating academic forums, offering bonus points to students who engaged in meaningful debates. McGonagall handled social media. If a student posted something ridiculous, she would fine them, and they would regret it. As for Dumbledore, he took a special interest in YouTube reaction videos. The Muggles are quite entertaining, he mused, watching a Try Not to Laugh challenge. Hogwarts had entered a new digital era. It wasn't quite the freedom students had hoped for, but at least, for now, the internet was here to stay. The new regulations surrounding the Hogwarts internet had done little to curb the students' enthusiasm for online activity. If anything, the professors' tight grip on digital access had only fueled the rebellion further. While Snape scowled over every meme and McGonagall rigidly approved each YouTube video, the students of Hogwarts were quietly planning their next move. The Great Wi-Fi Rebellion was not a loud, dramatic uprising. It was subtle, sneaky, and cleverly executed, perfectly fitting for the students of Hogwarts, who had learned a thing or two from their previous online escapades. It started with a whisper in the halls. I know someone who's still got the original Hognet router. Seriously? Yeah, but you didn't hear it from me. Soon, small pockets of students, Gryffindors, Slytherins, Hufflepuffs, and Ravenclaws alike, were secretly passing around a device that bypassed the professor's internet lockdown. It was a miniature Muggle router, enchanted to evade any Hogwarts firewall. Fred, George whispered late one night in the dormitory. We could really make some money off this. Fred grinned, rubbing his hands together. We could sell access to our private internet, a real unfiltered Hognet. The professors can't keep track of everything. George laughed. You think the professors will let us get away with it? Who cares what they think? Fred smirked. As long as the students are paying, we'll have a nice little business going. It wasn't long before Fred and George's idea gained traction. The twins launched their own underground internet service with the slogan, unfiltered, unregulated, unstoppable. For a small fee, any student could buy access to Fred and George's secret Wi-Fi network, free from the prying eyes of the professors. The first week was a massive success. Students from all four houses were sneaking away to secret locations, where they could access their favorite sites, memes, TikToks, Quidditch videos, and even the occasional illegal spellbook. But as the internet rebellion spread, so did the risks. The Great Hogwarts Censorship Act. Dumbledore, ever the calm observer, had noticed the growing digital unrest. He had been watching the students closely, particularly the Weasley twins, who had been far too quiet in their detention assignments. In the middle of the night, Dumbledore gathered a small group of professors, McGonagall, Snape, and Flitwick, for an emergency meeting. The students, Dumbledore said, folding his hands together, have found a way around our internet restrictions. McGonagall raised an eyebrow. That's impossible. We've sealed off every access point. Snape scowled. Except for the Weasley twins' so-called business venture. Flitwick adjusted his glasses. You don't think they've been selling access to their private network, do you? Dumbledore smiled wryly. I don't think. I know. The professors were on high alert. It was time to act, but Dumbledore had a plan of his own. The next morning, the Hogwarts corridors were filled with whispers about the new Great Hogwarts Censorship Act. It was announced in the Daily Prophet by none other than the Minister for Magic, Cornelius Fudge, who had personally come to the castle to restore order. Effective immediately, the headline read, all digital devices must be registered with the Ministry of Magic. Unauthorized magical internet access will be subject to severe penalties. The students were outraged. I can't believe this, Ron fumed, pacing in the Gryffindor common room. The Ministry's sticking their nose where it doesn't belong again. Hermione crossed her arms. It's ridiculous. We should be the ones in charge of how we use our own internet. Harry sighed, flipping through his phone. Looks like they're really cracking down. We won't be able to get away with anything now. The final digital showdown. Fred and George weren't deterred. We can still fight back, Fred said with a glint in his eye. They may have their Ministry rules, but we've got magic on our side. The twins knew that the only way to win this battle was to take the internet battle to the very heart of Hogwarts. They would need to launch a magical counterattack, one that would make it impossible for anyone to shut down their underground network. Their plan was simple but risky. Using their knowledge of magical runes and enchanted technology, they would hack the school's magical wards and create an impenetrable internet channel, effectively bypassing the Ministry's censorship. That night, under the cover of darkness, Fred and George made their way to the astronomy tower. There, with their wands and a few of their best inventions, they set up their makeshift control center. "Ready," George whispered, his fingers hovering over a stack of enchanted parchment. Fred grinned. "Let's make history." With a flick of their wands, the twins sent a burst of magic through the school's defenses, altering the wards that held the Ministry's spellwork in place. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, a series of lights flickered on in the astronomy tower, followed by an explosion of sound. Hogwarts' magical wards had been completely bypassed. The Wi-Fi was theirs. The real Hognet was back. But their celebration was short-lived. As the students cheered, a figure appeared at the door. McGonagall stood, her expression stern. "It seems," she said dryly, "that once again you've broken the rules." Fred and George exchanged glances. "Perhaps," Fred said with a grin, "the students need to enjoy a little more freedom." McGonagall raised an eyebrow. "Or perhaps," she replied, "you need a asterisk bit more detention." But deep down, the professors knew. The students had won this round, and Hogwarts would never be the same. The final showdown had been intense. Hogwarts' magical wards were no match for Fred and George's ingenuity, and while the professors had tried their best to keep the students from accessing the internet freely, they were ultimately outwitted by the Weasley twins. The internet had truly become part of Hogwarts life. The Ministry of Magic, faced with the undeniable reality that students were using the internet in ways they never imagined, reluctantly agreed to a compromise. In exchange for allowing students more freedom, the Ministry enacted a new set of digital regulations, the Hogwarts Digital Charter, which would officially regulate online activity within the castle. The Hogwarts Digital Charter allowed students to freely access Hognet without fear of Ministry intervention, as long as they followed certain guidelines. 1. No more unregulated memes. 2. No illegal spellbook downloads. 3. All internet-based pranks must be approved by the professor in charge of student entertainment. Despite these restrictions, the students were thrilled. The internet was back, and Hogwarts was in the digital age like never before. Fred and George took full advantage of the new internet freedoms. They became the official online distributors of Quidditch highlight reels, spell tutorials, and prank how-to guides. Soon, every student at Hogwarts was following their channel, and Marauder Legacy became the most popular online account at the school. Meanwhile, Draco Malfoy, whose Slytherin sensation account had been dormant for so long, was determined to reclaim his throne. He posted videos of exclusive behind-the-scenes footage from the Slytherin common room, mocking Gryffindor's antics. But it wasn't just the purebloods who were thriving in this new digital world. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students, who had been relatively quiet during the initial waves of the internet uprising, were now the biggest contributors to academic discussions, publishing insightful research papers and curating popular educational videos on the wizarding world's history. Even Cedric Diggory, once known for his Quidditch prowess, became a star for his how-to videos on plant care, gaining thousands of views across the school. Hermione, naturally, became the chief digital librarian. She took it upon herself to organize Hogwarts' online content into neat, easily accessible categories. The Hogwarts Learning Network, HLN, was born, where students could access study guides, spell reviews, and video tutorials on everything from potion making to care of magical creatures. Though she still found the idea of social media a bit frivolous, she couldn't help but appreciate how the internet was revolutionizing the way students learned. "It's amazing," she said, her eyes glued to a screen displaying a video titled Advanced Transfiguration: The Metamorphosis of Non-Living Objects. "We can practically learn anything online now." Ron, who had initially been skeptical about the educational value of the internet, sat beside her, watching a Quidditch highlights reel. Well, maybe some things should just stay offline. But there was still a lingering sense of tension. Snape, whose attempts to censor Hogwarts' internet had been largely unsuccessful, seemed to find new ways to make things difficult for students online. He absolutely loathed the videos mocking his infamous potions lectures and made it his personal mission to ban every student from posting anything involving his less-than-perfect teaching moments. "I'll not be the laughingstock of the entire wizarding world," Snape hissed, storming into the Great Hall as a new meme of him dramatically sighing during class was plastered across the enchanted ceiling. Despite his best efforts, however, Snape couldn't stop the internet's spread. The memes, the videos, the pranks, it was all part of the new Hogwarts culture. Even Dumbledore, though always a little more reserved about the digital revolution, couldn't help but indulge himself. He was often found in his office, watching Muggle comedy sketches, laughing at jokes about wizards who couldn't control their wands. But the most significant change wasn't just the endless memes or viral videos. It was the way the students of Hogwarts had grown. The internet had become more than just a way to waste time. It had fostered creativity, connection, and collaboration. Students were learning to share their passions in ways they'd never dreamed of before. The online world had become an extension of Hogwarts itself. Even the smallest quirks of student life were now available for everyone to see. The internet was no longer a distraction or something to be feared. It was simply part of Hogwarts, and for better or for worse, it seemed like it was here to stay. As the weeks passed, Hogwarts settled into its new routine. The internet, once a forbidden tool, had now woven itself into the fabric of everyday student life. The Great Wi-Fi Rebellion had left its mark on the school, and although professors like Snape still tried to stifle online expression, the influence of the internet was undeniable. But as with all revolutions, there were consequences. Not everyone was thrilled with the freedom that the internet brought to Hogwarts. While the majority of students were enjoying the perks of unfiltered access, some of the more traditional factions of the school began to notice the growing divide. The pureblood elite, those who had spent years ruling the corridors of Hogwarts, found themselves increasingly alienated. With the rise of the internet, knowledge, and influence, which had once been limited to those with family connections or wealth, was now accessible to anyone with a magical device. Draco Malfoy, who had once considered himself the undisputed ruler of Hogwarts' social scene, was growing increasingly agitated by the rise of new internet stars. "I can't believe this," Draco muttered one afternoon, watching as a video of a Hufflepuff student's potion tutorial had garnered more likes than his latest Quidditch video. "This isn't how things are supposed to work." He stood beside his group of Slytherins in the common room, his gaze fixed on the screen. The video, titled How to Brew the Perfect Polyjuice Potion, was an informative yet easy-to-follow tutorial hosted by a third-year Hufflepuff named Daphne Green. The comments section was filled with praises from students across all houses. "Daphne Green," Draco sneered. "A Hufflepuff?" Showing everyone up with potions, he flicked his wand and the screen went blank. This is a disgrace. The internet had begun to democratize knowledge, and in doing so, it was creating cracks in the social hierarchies that had once defined Hogwarts. The divide wasn't just among the students, either. Some professors, too, were beginning to feel the tension. Professor Binns, for example, had been using the internet to upload ancient wizarding history podcasts. But instead of being the authority on all things historical, Binns now found his lectures to be overshadowed by a new generation of scholars. Ravenclaw students like Luna Lovegood had started a digital project called Ravenclaw's Arcane Archives, which not only covered traditional topics, but also delved into alternative histories of magic. One such podcast about the lost spells of Atlantis was gaining thousands of views, and was far more popular than any of Binns' lectures. "I'm being undermined by the students," Binns grumbled to Flitwick, who, while sympathetic, couldn't help but be amused by the situation. Even the students felt the change. While some embraced the democratization of knowledge, others began to resent it. There were growing numbers of students who complained that real-world experiences, like studying in the library, working with professors, or engaging in one-on-one learning, were being overshadowed by the fast-paced, often unreliable content posted online. Hermione had noticed this herself. "I think we need to start looking at how we use the internet," she said one evening, standing in the Gryffindor common room. "I'm worried that it's making students lazy. They're getting all their information from videos and memes rather than engaging with actual books and professors." Harry, who had been absorbed in his latest Quidditch meme, glanced up. "Isn't it just a different way of learning, though?" "It is," Hermione agreed. "But it's also making students more reliant on quick fixes and flashy information, instead of developing critical thinking skills." Ron nodded. "It's like with those Quidditch highlight videos. Everyone knows the basics, but when it comes to real strategy, no one knows what's going on." Despite the concerns, the influence of the internet continued to grow, creating an unspoken tension between those who embraced the digital age and those who resisted it. Hogwarts had become divided, not just by houses or bloodlines, but by ideas. And this tension was about to come to a head in a way no one had anticipated. The battle of the digital and traditionalists. One chilly evening, a group of students led by Draco Malfoy, along with a few pureblood loyalists, gathered in the Slytherin common room, their eyes narrowed in determination. "This ends now," Draco said, his voice low and intense. "We can't let the internet take over Hogwarts. It's ruining everything. Tradition is being thrown out the window in favor of instant gratification." Theo nodded in agreement. "We've got to do something. We need to remind everyone that Hogwarts isn't just a website. It's a school." And so, Draco launched what would be known as the Digital Purge, a campaign to reclaim the heart of Hogwarts from the clutches of technology. Their first target was the Hogwarts Learning Network. Draco and his followers began spreading rumors about the danger of online learning, claiming that it promoted shortcuts and gave students false information. They even convinced a few professors to publicly denounce the idea of relying on the internet for academic success. But unsurprisingly, their efforts only sparked more resistance. Fred and George, along with a coalition of students who had embraced the internet's full potential, responded by launching a massive counter-campaign. The hashtag #HogwartsIsOnline hashtag took over the school's magical forums. Videos emerged showing the benefits of online learning, personal stories of how students had discovered their talents thanks to Hognet, and a rousing speech by none other than Hermione Granger herself, championing the idea that magic and technology could and should work together. The battle for the soul of Hogwarts had begun. As both sides rallied their forces, the magical world stood on the precipice of an era where the digital and traditional methods of learning and living would have to coexist. Would Hogwarts remain a place for pure academic study and ancient traditions? Or would it fully embrace the internet and the changes it brought? It seemed that the digital divide would define the future of Hogwarts. The battle of the digital and traditionalists had sparked a fire that was quickly spreading throughout Hogwarts. The conflict was no longer just a few whispered conversations in the corridors. It had become a full-scale school-wide debate. Students were divided, and the professors weren't much better off. The issue had become personal for many. Draco Malfoy, who had been so sure of his standing in Hogwarts before the rise of the internet, found himself in the uncomfortable position of leading a movement against the very thing that had shaken the foundations of his world. "I can't believe this," Draco muttered to Pansy Parkinson as they sat in the Slytherin common room, plotting their next move. "I thought I had it all figured out. But now it's like every student in this school has become obsessed with their devices. We're losing control." Pansy looked just as frustrated. "It's like everyone's looking at their screens instead of at each other. What happened to a good old-fashioned rivalry?" Draco sighed. "It's not just about rivalry anymore, Pansy. It's about everything. People are getting their information, their friendships, their entire lives from these screens." He sneered at the mention of the word. "We're losing the Hogwarts I grew up with. Tradition is fading." Across the hall, in the Gryffindor common room, the mood was very different. The students there, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and others, were sitting around, scrolling through their laptops, tablets, and phones, all talking about the current events. The excitement in the room was palpable as they tried to think of ways to combat Draco's growing resistance. You know, Hermione said, glancing up from her device, we can't just keep playing defense. We need to show them that the internet isn't some sort of threat to Hogwarts. It's a tool that can enhance our education, our connections, our lives. But Hermione, Ron said, shaking his head, that's not what they're arguing. Draco and his gang just want to go back to the old ways. Like the internet is ruining everything. I know, Hermione replied, but that's where they're wrong. They're missing the bigger picture. She turned to Fred and George, who had been brainstorming ways to help the school embrace the internet without it turning into a free-for-all. Here's the plan, Fred began. We'll organize a debate, a real Hogwarts-wide debate. It'll be us versus Draco's crowd. We'll show them that the internet isn't just some passing phase. It's the future. George nodded enthusiastically. And we'll make sure to get some serious backup, maybe even a few professors to vouch for us. We can't let them push us back to the old days. It's time for a new era. Despite their initial doubts, Draco and his followers agreed to the debate, hoping to put the internet's influence in its place. As the day approached, the entire school was buzzing with excitement. This would be no ordinary debate. It would be a battle for Hogwarts' future. The Great Digital Debate. The Great Hall was transformed into an arena. Long rows of benches had been set up, facing a large stage where the two factions would face off. On one side stood the digital revolutionaries, students like Fred and George Weasley, Hermione Granger, and several others who had embraced the power of the internet. On the other side stood the traditionalists, Draco Malfoy, Pansy Parkinson, and a few professors who still held to the belief that the old ways were best. Dumbledore stood at the podium, his eyes twinkling. Welcome, students, professors, and esteemed guests. Today, we gather to discuss the future of Hogwarts in the digital age. Will we embrace the internet as a tool for progress, or will we reject it in favor of tradition? Let the debate begin. First to speak was Draco, who walked confidently to the stage, glaring at the students on the other side. It's simple, Draco began. Hogwarts has stood for centuries as a bastion of tradition, a place where magic and knowledge are passed down through the generations, where students learn not just from books, but from real experiences. This internet, it's a distraction. It promotes laziness and the idea that shortcuts are acceptable. We should be following in the footsteps of those who came before us, not chasing after something that will only lead us astray. The audience was quiet, the air thick with tension. Draco's words struck a chord with many, particularly among the pureblood families and those who had long held Hogwarts' traditional values dear. Next up was Hermione, who stood tall and faced the crowd. I respect the traditions of this school, Hermione said, her voice strong. But I also know that the world is changing. The internet is not the enemy, it's an opportunity. An opportunity for all of us to share knowledge, to learn in new ways, to connect with people we might never have met otherwise. It's not about replacing the old ways of learning, but expanding them. She paused, glancing at Draco. Just because something is new doesn't mean it's wrong. The internet can help us grow, just like the books and magic we've relied on for centuries. It's not the technology that's the problem, it's how we use it. And as students of Hogwarts, it's our responsibility to learn how to use it wisely. There was a quiet murmur of agreement from the crowd. Some of the students, especially from Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, were nodding along. The debate continued for hours. Fred and George championed the fun and creativity the internet brought to Hogwarts, showing examples of how it had enhanced their education and even helped improve Quidditch strategies. Meanwhile, Draco's group continued to argue that relying too much on the internet would undermine the core values of a true Hogwarts education. As the final speeches began, the tension was palpable. Both sides had presented their cases, but the question remained: who would win? Dumbledore stood up to close the debate. His voice, calm and steady, filled the room. Students, professors, it is clear that there are two very distinct visions of the future of Hogwarts. The question we must ask ourselves is not whether we should have the internet, but how we can best integrate it into our lives. We are a school that prides itself on progress, but also on tradition. Let us not forget that it is both that has allowed us to thrive. He paused for a moment, looking around at the students and faculty. The future of Hogwarts lies not in choosing one or the other, but in finding a way to merge the best of both worlds. Perhaps together, we can create a Hogwarts that honors its past, while embracing the possibilities of the future. The room fell silent. The debate had concluded, but the real work had only just begun. In the end, there were no clear winners, only a collective understanding that Hogwarts was at a crossroads. The internet, with all its benefits and drawbacks, was a tool that could shape the school's future. But how it would be used was still up for debate. The question wasn't whether to embrace technology. It was how to balance it with the tradition that made Hogwarts what it was. The great digital debate had left a lasting impression on Hogwarts, but life continued on. The immediate fallout from the debate was a palpable sense of change in the air. It wasn't a victory for one side or the other, but a clear understanding had emerged. Hogwarts could no longer be a place that simply clung to the past. Change was inevitable, and students and professors alike would have to find ways to coexist with both magic and technology. In the weeks that followed, Dumbledore convened a council made up of students, professors, and even the Weasley twins, to discuss how best to integrate the internet into Hogwarts without letting it overtake the more traditional aspects of the school. The result was a compromise that would transform the very fabric of Hogwarts life. It was called the Hogwarts Digital Integration Plan, HDIP, and it was unlike anything the school had ever seen. The plan sought to balance the old and new. Classes now included both traditional methods of teaching, lecture-based learning, hands-on experience, and practical spells, and digital methods that encouraged independent research, online collaboration, and virtual discussions. Professors who had once been skeptical of the internet, like Professor McGonagall and even Snape, were gradually brought around to the idea. McGonagall, in particular, was intrigued by how much easier it was to supplement her transfiguration lessons with videos showing the practical applications of transfiguration in real life. Even Snape grudgingly admitted that some online resources helped refine the brewing of potions, though he would never admit it to a student. The newly formed Hogwarts Digital Learning Center was opened, a hybrid space that served as both a library and a study hall for students who wanted to take full advantage of online resources. It became a hub where students could research, collaborate, and discuss their ideas freely. But it wasn't just about academic use. The center also hosted workshops on internet safety, digital ethics, and how to maintain healthy boundaries with technology. Fred and George, of course, were instrumental in creating the digital pranking workshops, where students could learn how to safely prank their peers using internet-based tools like magical software and enchanted gifts. The twins made sure these sessions had plenty of audience participation, ensuring that pranks didn't cross into dangerous territory. Even more surprising, there were now official online clubs. The Hogwarts Quidditch Club, for example, hosted livestreamed matches, allowing alumni and students from other schools to tune in. The Wizarding History Club held virtual meetings to discuss ancient texts that students could access from anywhere in the world, creating global connections among wizards and witches who otherwise might never have met. The internet had officially become part of the Hogwarts experience, its benefits woven seamlessly into the lives of students and teachers alike. But just as with any major change, challenges still lingered. For one, the growing digital world had intensified the social pressures on students. While the internet allowed students to express themselves in new ways, it also opened the door to bullying, comparison, and the fear of missing out. Social media accounts like Slytherin Vibes and Hufflepuff Buzz became battlegrounds for petty arguments and misunderstandings. It wasn't just students' grades or their Quidditch scores that were up for discussion. Now their entire lives were public. One chilly evening, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were sitting in the Gryffindor common room, scrolling through their magical tablets. Harry had just received a particularly cutting comment on one of his posts about Quidditch, and the sting of it was obvious on his face. "Don't let it get to you, Harry," Hermione said, her voice gentle. "People can be cruel online, but it doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things." "I know," Harry muttered, "but it just feels different now. It's not like when we used to get those letters or just talk face to face. Everything's out in the open, and you can't control how people see you." Ron, who had been silently reading through a Wizard's weekly article on the latest broomstick innovations, glanced up. It's like there's no privacy anymore. Everyone's trying to keep up with everyone else's lives, and if you don't post enough, people think something's wrong. Hermione nodded. I've noticed it too. People are sharing more and more, sometimes things they wouldn't normally say in person. It's like they're trying to get approval or validation from everyone else. Maybe it's a good thing people can't just hide behind a book or a charm anymore, Harry said, giving a half-hearted smile. At least we're all forced to deal with it. While the students adapted to the ever-present reality of the internet, there was no doubt that they were still learning how to handle it. The connection between the online world and their real-world lives was a delicate balance. Despite the occasional frustration, however, there were still incredible moments of connection. Students found new friendships across houses, bonded over shared interests in online wizarding fandoms, and began to view each other as more than just members of rival groups. The sense of community, previously confined to the physical walls of Hogwarts, now extended into the digital realm. Online study groups flourished, with students from all years coming together to help one another, share resources, and collaborate on magical projects. Hermione's Hogwarts Learning Network grew to encompass not just academic studies but creative pursuits, from wizarding art to magical coding. But the internet, like any tool, was still a double-edged sword. For every positive development, there was a new challenge. The professors, too, had to learn how to adapt. Some, like McGonagall, used online resources to expand her lessons, but others, like Snape, were more resistant to change. Snape, in particular, found himself increasingly annoyed with students who chose to watch instructional videos on potion making rather than listening to him in person. "I will not be replaced by a video," Snape roared one day, after several students had posted their own potion recipe tutorial that gained more views than his class. But even Snape couldn't deny the occasional benefits of the internet. In a rare moment of begrudging appreciation, he muttered to Hermione one day, "Your learning network is tolerable, but don't think for one moment that it's a substitute for proper potions instruction." "I never said it was, Professor," Hermione replied, barely hiding her smile. As for the future of Hogwarts, it seemed that the internet was no longer just an experiment or a passing phase. It had become an integral part of the school's identity. The true test, however, would be whether Hogwarts could continue to balance the past and the future, tradition and progress. And perhaps most importantly, whether the students could learn to navigate the tricky world of digital connection without losing sight of what made them human. For now, at least, Hogwarts had found a new normal. And as long as the students could find a way to balance the digital with the magical, the school would continue to thrive. The aftermath of the Hogwarts Digital Integration Plan, HDIP, had settled into a new routine. While the school still buzzed with excitement over the advances brought by the internet, the students and faculty were beginning to experience the growing pains that came with embracing such a vast change. For the first time in Hogwarts history, the students were not just learning magic, but navigating a world where the lines between the digital and the magical were blurring. The morning sun poured through the windows of the Gryffindor Common Room, casting a warm glow on the students gathered there. Hermione sat at the center of it all, her tablet in hand as she scrolled through the latest updates on the Hogwarts Digital Learning Hub, which had been established as a place for students to access educational resources, share notes, and collaborate on projects. She'd been working tirelessly to ensure that it was as accessible and inclusive as possible. "This is incredible," Hermione said, her voice filled with a mix of pride and excitement as she looked at her screen. "We've already got over 5,000 students participating in the hub. And look, there's a new group for students interested in magical creatures." Ron, who was half-heartedly trying to read a Quidditch magazine, barely glanced up. 5,000? That's a lot of people. But isn't it just too much? I mean, with all these students online, it feels like we're just constantly connected. "I get what you mean," Hermione said, her expression turning serious. "But the point of the hub isn't just to create more noise. It's to help us find the right information when we need it. There's so much to learn, and this makes it easier for everyone to contribute." "But are we really learning anything?" Ron asked, finally putting down the magazine. Sometimes it feels like we're just clicking through things and calling it education. Before Hermione could respond, Harry walked in, holding his tablet and scrolling through his own updates. He gave a half smile, which was quickly followed by a look of concern. I don't know, Hermione, he said. I've been thinking about what Ron said. With all the information out there, how do we know what's real? What's actually useful? Just because it's online doesn't mean it's right. Hermione's brow furrowed as she considered Harry's point. She'd been so focused on the potential of the internet to change education that she hadn't fully acknowledged the complexities. In a way, the internet had opened up a new world of information, one that could be both enlightening and overwhelming. We have to be careful, Hermione said finally. The internet has created new opportunities, but it's also made it easier for misinformation to spread. We need to learn how to filter what's good from what's harmful, how to verify what we see online. Ron nodded. That's why I like the library. No one's going to post fake stuff in there. True, Hermione said, her smile returning. But we also can't ignore the fact that the internet is shaping how we learn and interact with the world. It's not going away. And in a lot of ways, it's enhancing our education. We just have to be smart about it. As the conversation continued, the rest of the students in the common room began discussing their own experiences with the internet. Some had used it to discover new magical theories, others had collaborated on research projects, and some had joined social groups that connected students from different schools around the world. The benefits were clear, but so were the challenges. Meanwhile, across the castle, Draco Malfoy was standing in front of his private mirror in the Slytherin common room, his expression tight with frustration. Despite the efforts of his group to slow the internet's rise at Hogwarts, it had only grown more entrenched. The digital integration plan had passed, and there was no going back. Draco could no longer pretend that Hogwarts was still the traditional, pure-blood sanctuary it had once been. Why does it feel like everything is changing so fast? Draco muttered to himself, glaring at his reflection. He hated how technology had begun to blur the lines of power and influence at Hogwarts. It was no longer just about who you knew or what your bloodline was. It was about who had the most followers or the most popular online account. Malfoy, you can't win this one, Blaise Zabini said from the doorway. The internet's here to stay. Whether you like it or not, it's changing everything. Draco turned, his eyes narrowing. I don't care what you think, Zabini. This school was fine without all these gadgets and distractions. We had honor and respect. But now everyone's too busy watching videos of some Hufflepuff's broomstick trick to care about anything else. Blaise chuckled. Sounds like jealousy to me. I'm not jealous, Draco snapped. I'm angry. I don't want to live in a world where someone like Green, a Hufflepuff, is more popular than me because of some viral video. Blaise shook his head. The world's changing, Draco. Either you change with it or get left behind. Draco remained silent, the words sinking in. He didn't like them, but he knew they were true. The old ways, his ways, weren't going to cut it anymore. The digital age had arrived at Hogwarts, and no amount of scorn or disdain was going to stop it. As the days passed, Draco reluctantly began to adapt. He launched his own blog, Malfoy's Magic, where he wrote about his thoughts on the world of wizardry, Quidditch, and even personal opinions on the latest trends in wizarding fashion. He wasn't thrilled about the idea of sharing his life with the world, but it was the only way he could stay relevant in this new digital age. Meanwhile, the rivalry between Slytherin and Gryffindor was beginning to take on a new form. The two houses, once fierce competitors on the Quidditch pitch, now found themselves clashing in the digital arena. The students of each house engaged in online challenges, trying to outdo each other with creative memes, viral spells, and even digital pranks that left everyone in stitches. One particular incident involved a rogue digital prank, set up by Fred and George, of course, that completely took over the Slytherin house's magical network. For an entire day, the Slytherins were forced to watch a continuous loop of Draco Malfoy's infamous defeated face after losing a Quidditch match. The prank, posted by Fred, was viewed thousands of times and quickly became a meme that Slytherins would never live down. For the first time, Draco found himself laughing at the very thing he had once sworn to destroy. He couldn't help it. The prank was just too good. Despite the digital clash, the students of Hogwarts had begun to settle into a new rhythm. The internet, while still a source of tension, was now an inextricable part of their lives. They had learned to balance magic with technology, creating a school environment where both worlds coexisted, sometimes uneasily, but often productively. The real question now was how far the internet would go in shaping Hogwarts' future. Would it continue to empower the students, or would it eventually outgrow its role in the classroom and take over every aspect of life at the castle? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. Hogwarts had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. The internet had become an integral part of the wizarding world, and Hogwarts would have to adapt or risk being left behind. As the months passed, the presence of the internet at Hogwarts became more entrenched. The school had fully adapted to the digital age, and the magical and non-magical worlds were now inextricably linked. But with this connection came unforeseen consequences. Students found themselves navigating not just spells and potions, but also the complex web of social media, digital identities, and online reputations. The digital age had brought incredible benefits. Hogwarts students could now access real-time updates from wizarding communities around the globe, share magical discoveries, and collaborate on projects in ways that had never been possible before. But it had also introduced a new level of pressure to perform, to maintain an online image, to constantly be on. And for many students, this had begun to take a toll. One chilly afternoon, as the sun began to set behind the towering spires of Hogwarts, Harry, Hermione, and Ron sat in the Gryffindor common room, reflecting on the changes that had swept over their school. Harry stared at the glowing screen of his tablet, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. "I just don't get it anymore," Harry said, frustration clear in his voice. "The internet was supposed to be about learning, right? But now it feels like it's all about image. How many likes you get, how many followers you have." Hermione, who had been reviewing an online lecture about ancient magical runes, nodded thoughtfully. "It's true. The lines between what's real and what's online have become so blurry. There's this constant pressure to keep up, to appear a certain way. I don't know how anyone has time for it," Ron chimed in, a hint of irritation in his tone. "Between classes, homework, and Quidditch, how are we supposed to keep up with all this online nonsense?" Hermione's eyes softened. "I think it's about finding balance. The internet is a tool, but we have to be smart about how we use it. We can't let it take over our lives." Harry sighed. "That's easy for you to say. You're the one who's always on top of things. You've got everything sorted out." Hermione paused, considering his words. "It's not always as perfect as it seems. Even I've felt overwhelmed sometimes. But we're all learning. The internet isn't going anywhere, so we need to figure out how to use it without letting it control us." Just then, Neville Longbottom walked in, holding his own tablet. He looked tired, and there were dark circles under his eyes. As he dropped into an armchair next to them, he let out a heavy sigh. "You look like you haven't slept in days," Ron remarked, giving Neville a concerned look. Neville ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "It's this new study group online. I've been helping with a project on magical plants, and it's been nonstop. I can't keep up with everyone's expectations, and it's starting to feel like I'm always online. I can't get away from it. I don't know how you two do it." "I know what you mean," Hermione said gently. "There's a difference between being online for school and being constantly online. You have to set boundaries." "I wish I could set boundaries," Neville muttered. "But when everyone's posting updates, I feel like I'm falling behind if I don't check in, if I don't contribute. I don't know how to keep up with it all." "I think we're all struggling with that," Harry said, rubbing his temples. "It's like we're living in two worlds now. One where we go to class and do magic, and another where we're expected to perform online." The conversation hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. For all the positives that the internet had brought to Hogwarts, it had also introduced new pressures that the students weren't sure how to navigate. Meanwhile, in the heart of the school, Professor Dumbledore had been quietly observing the students' struggles. He had always been a champion of change, but even he couldn't ignore the mounting tension that the internet had caused. There was a growing divide between those who embraced the new digital world and those who resisted it, and the strain was beginning to show. One evening, Dumbledore called for a meeting of faculty to discuss the state of the school in the digital age. Professors McGonagall, Flitwick, Snape, and several others gathered in his office, each one with a tablet or enchanted parchment in hand. The room was filled with an air of quiet contemplation. "I've noticed a growing concern among the students," Dumbledore began, his voice soft but firm. "The internet is a double-edged sword. It offers them knowledge, connection, and a wealth of resources. But it also comes with a price: constant distraction, unrealistic expectations, and the danger of becoming overwhelmed." Professor McGonagall, ever the pragmatist, nodded in agreement. "The academic performance of the students is beginning to suffer. They're distracted by online pressure, and it's affecting their focus in class." Snape, ever cynical, added, "It's not just the academics. There's an arrogance now. Students believe that they can learn everything from a screen without proper guidance. The rise of online tutorials and magical DIY videos is making them think they can bypass actual instruction." Dumbledore's eyes twinkled with a mixture of concern and wisdom. "We must find a balance, my friends. We cannot turn back the clock and erase the internet, but we can guide our students toward a healthier use of it. We must teach them to manage their time, to recognize when they are becoming too reliant on it, and most importantly, to preserve the importance of human connection." McGonagall spoke up again, her voice tinged with frustration. "And what about those who are completely disengaged from the internet? The ones who refuse to participate in the digital world? Should we just leave them behind?" "That's a valid concern," Dumbledore admitted. "We must ensure that no student feels excluded. Everyone should have the opportunity to learn, whether through traditional methods or digital means. We must find ways to make both work together." As the meeting continued, it became clear that the professors, like the students, were still adjusting to the new digital reality. They didn't have all the answers, but they were committed to finding solutions. The next day, Dumbledore addressed the students during the morning assembly. The great hall was filled with the usual hustle and bustle, but an unusual hush fell over the room as the headmaster stood before them. "My dear students," he began, his voice calm but authoritative, "it has come to my attention that many of you are struggling with the challenges posed by the internet. While it has brought great benefits, it has also introduced pressures that can be overwhelming. It is important to remember that the internet is a tool, an extension of your magical education, but not a replacement for the real world." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You must learn to strike a balance. Use the internet wisely, but never let it replace the real connections you make with your friends, your teachers, and your magical education. Remember that true learning comes from experience, not just from a screen." As Dumbledore finished, there was a moment of silence in the hall. Then slowly, students began to applaud. It wasn't loud or enthusiastic, but there was an understanding in the room. The headmaster's words had resonated. Later that day, Harry, Hermione, and Ron found themselves once again in the Gryffindor common room, pondering Dumbledore's speech. "Balance," Hermione said thoughtfully. "I think that's the key. We need to manage how much we rely on the internet while still finding time for the things that truly matter." "I guess that means less time scrolling through social media and more time actually doing magic," Ron said with a grin. Harry nodded. "Sounds like a good plan." As the trio sat back, the crackling of the fire filling the silence, they realized that while the internet had become an inseparable part of Hogwarts, it was up to them, students and faculty alike, to navigate this new world with wisdom and responsibility. The future of Hogwarts depended on finding harmony between the magical and the digital. And though the journey ahead might not always be easy, it was one they would face together. As the year progressed, the excitement surrounding the digital age at Hogwarts began to settle into a new normal. Students were no longer just experimenting with the internet. They were now navigating its complexities as part of their everyday lives. Some embraced it fully, diving deep into the world of online learning and digital wizardry, while others remained skeptical, unsure of how to balance their traditional magical education with the demands of the new digital world. For Harry, Hermione, and Ron, the struggle for balance was constant. Hermione had fully embraced the potential of the internet, frequently attending online seminars and contributing to various magical communities. Ron, on the other hand, had remained more cautious, unsure about how to integrate the digital world into his daily routine without getting lost in the noise. Harry, meanwhile, found himself caught between the two. While he appreciated the convenience of the internet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. A sense that the technology was eroding something vital, something irreplaceable. One afternoon, as Harry sat by the Gryffindor common room window, staring out at the sprawling grounds of Hogwarts, he couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. The internet had brought so many changes to the castle, from online Quidditch rankings to virtual magical creature exhibits. But it had also brought an overwhelming sense of expectation. Everyone, it seemed, was expected to perform, to contribute, to be constantly connected. And Harry couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was being lost in the process. Hermione, Harry said suddenly, turning to his friend who was engrossed in a series of online lectures about spell theory. Do you ever feel like we're losing something? Like, I don't know, something important about Hogwarts. Hermione blinked, momentarily distracted from her screen. What do you mean? I mean, Harry said, running a hand through his hair. The internet's great, but it feels like we're constantly plugged in. People are always online, always sharing their thoughts, always competing for attention. I miss the days when things were simpler, when you didn't have to worry about your profile or how many likes you got on your last post. Ron, who had been silently listening from the armchair, chimed in. Yeah, I get what you mean, mate. It's like we're all living in this big online fishbowl. Everyone can see everything we do, and it's hard to escape. It used to be that our lives were just ours, you know? Hermione's face softened as she closed her tablet and set it down. I get it, Harry. I really do. The internet's amazing. It opens up so many doors. But it's also overwhelming. There's always something new to read, something new to watch, someone new to compare yourself to. The three friends sat in silence for a moment, each of them grappling with the same thought. It wasn't that they hated the internet. They could all see the benefits it brought to their education and to their connections with other wizarding schools around the world. But it was starting to feel like there was no escape from it, like they were being pulled in different directions by the constant stream of information. I think Dumbledore was right, Hermione said finally. It's about balance. We have to be careful not to let the internet take over our lives. It's a tool, just like magic. It's how we use it that matters. I guess, Ron said. But it still doesn't change the fact that it's hard to step away. Every time I turn around, there's something new to watch, some new meme to laugh at. It's like the world's moving faster than we can keep up with. Harry nodded in agreement. I just wish we could get back to a time when it wasn't all about who could post the most or get the most views. Yeah, Ron agreed. It'd be nice if we could just focus on magic for a change. Just as the conversation was beginning to settle, a loud bang interrupted the peaceful silence of the common room. Fred and George Weasley burst through the door, wide grins plastered across their faces. Oi, Harry! Hermione! Ron! Fred called, his voice full of excitement. You won't believe what we've got cooking this time. Yeah, George added, his eyes gleaming mischievously. We've taken digital pranks to a whole new level. Fred waved a tablet in the air, and Ron groaned. Not more of this, please. You two have already done enough damage with those enchanted memes. You can never have too much fun, Ron, Fred said, sitting down next to Harry. You've got to see this. He tapped a few buttons on the tablet, and instantly, the entire Gryffindor common room was flooded with images of Professor Snape's face, frozen mid-sneer, and every student's favorite Slytherin, Draco Malfoy, dancing in a ridiculous outfit. The images were accompanied by a catchy, repetitive song that quickly became impossible to ignore. Harry and Hermione both burst out laughing, while Ron shook his head in disbelief. I swear, Ron muttered, you two are out of control. It's harmless fun, Fred said with a grin. Besides, we've made sure to hide the source code. No one will ever know it was us. I wouldn't be so sure of that, Hermione warned, raising an eyebrow. With the way digital tracking works these days, it won't be long before someone figures it out. Fred and George exchanged a look, but their smiles didn't waver. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it, George said with a shrug. As the prank continued to unfold in front of them, the trio couldn't help but laugh. Despite the overwhelming sense of constant connection that the internet had brought to their lives, moments like these, moments of pure, unfiltered fun, were a reminder that there was still magic to be found in the world. Still, the conversation lingered in the back of Harry's mind. The digital world was growing faster than they could ever imagine. But as much as they tried to embrace it, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being pulled further away from the heart of what Hogwarts had always been. It wasn't just about the magic they were learning, it was about the connections they were making. The friendships, the bonds that had been formed over shared experiences. No amount of digital interaction could replace the real world connections they had with one another. As the laughter in the common room died down, Harry made a silent promise to himself. He wasn't going to let the internet consume him. He wasn't going to let it pull him away from the things that truly mattered, the people who mattered. The digital age had arrived at Hogwarts, but Harry wasn't going to let it change who he was. Not completely. The question remained, though. As the world continued to evolve and the internet became an even greater force, could Hogwarts, could the students, hold on to what was truly important? Would they be able to balance magic with technology, or would they lose themselves in the digital maze? Time, as always, would tell. The days that followed were filled with a palpable sense of unease. Despite the laughter and the pranks, there was an undeniable tension in the air. The internet had brought about a fundamental shift at Hogwarts, and while some students were thriving, others were struggling to keep pace. It seemed as though the school was divided into two camps: those who embraced the new technology with open arms, and those who felt overwhelmed and alienated by it. Harry, Hermione, and Ron had been talking a lot about the changes over the past few weeks, and while they had all agreed that the internet had its advantages, there was still a sense of discomfort that lingered. They weren't alone in feeling this way. A growing number of students had begun to complain about the constant bombardment of information and the pressure to be on all the time. In the Slytherin common room, Draco Malfoy and his friends had taken full advantage of the digital world. They had become experts at curating their online personas, posting perfectly composed photos of themselves in the most fashionable robes, sharing snippets of their lives as though they were celebrities. It wasn't just about the fun and games for Draco. It was about power. The more followers, likes, and views he accumulated, the more he felt in control. It wasn't long before Draco became one of the most popular students at Hogwarts, his social media presence a constant source of envy and admiration. But it wasn't all fun and games. Draco had also found himself under increasing pressure to maintain his online image, and with that came the inevitable comparison to others. Students who didn't measure up to his level of online success were often the subject of his ridicule, and he began to use his platform to spread subtle insults under the guise of humor. It was all part of the game, and Draco was more than willing to play it. On the other hand, there were students like Neville Longbottom, who felt increasingly alienated from the digital world. Though he had tried to engage with the internet, he found it hard to keep up with the ever-changing trends and the constant barrage of information. The pressure to perform online weighed heavily on him, and his grades had started to slip as he struggled to balance his magical studies with his digital life. Neville wasn't the only one feeling this way. Many students had begun to withdraw from the internet entirely, opting to spend more time in the library or outside, away from their screens. They had begun to realize that the internet, while useful, was also an endless stream of distraction, and they wanted to take a step back. It was a situation that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore, and as the divide between students deepened, the tension within Hogwarts began to escalate. One evening, in the midst of this growing divide, Harry, Hermione, and Ron found themselves in the Great Hall, watching as a group of students gathered around a large enchanted screen. The screen flickered with the latest trending topic, a debate about whether or not the Hogwarts Quidditch team should adopt a new virtual training regimen, which involved using augmented reality glasses to simulate flying conditions. Harry listened intently as the debate unfolded. Some students were all for it, arguing that it would revolutionize Quidditch training and give the team an edge in the upcoming tournament. Others, like Ron, were less than impressed. Augmented reality? What's next? Virtual butterbeer? Ron muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. Hermione, ever the voice of reason, sighed. It's just a tool, Ron. It could help with training. Think about it, using virtual simulations to improve your reflexes and strategy. It's not a replacement for real Quidditch, just an enhancement. I don't know, Ron said, his voice tinged with skepticism. It just feels like it's going too far. First it's training, then it's games, and who knows where it'll end up. We'll all be flying on virtual broomsticks next. As the conversation continued, Harry couldn't help but feel that Ron was right. The more the internet and technology became integrated into their lives, the more it seemed like they were losing the very things that made their world magical in the first place. Quidditch wasn't just about winning, it was about the thrill of the game, the wind in your hair, the camaraderie with your teammates. Augmented reality couldn't replicate that. But there was something else that was bothering Harry, something deeper than just the changes to Quidditch. He was beginning to wonder whether the internet was making people more isolated. Despite all the connections it allowed, there was a strange sense of loneliness that seemed to pervade Hogwarts. People were spending more time online, and less time talking face to face. They were more concerned with their virtual personas than with the real relationships they had with each other. It was a thought that had been gnawing at Harry for weeks. He had seen it firsthand. Students spending hours on their tablets, barely interacting with each other in person. Even the conversations in the common room had become more superficial, focused on memes and trending topics rather than meaningful discussions. In the midst of his contemplation, Harry was jolted back to reality by the loud voice of Professor McGonagall, who had stepped up to the podium at the front of the Great Hall. "Students," she began, her tone stern but not unkind, "it has come to my attention that the integration of the internet into Hogwarts' academic and social life has caused some disruption. While the benefits of digital learning and communication are clear, there are concerns that certain aspects of this new reality are having unintended consequences." A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Harry could tell that McGonagall's words struck a chord with many students. "We cannot deny that the internet has provided new opportunities," she continued, "but it has also brought with it new challenges. We must be mindful of the way it affects our school spirit, our relationships, and our ability to truly engage with one another. To that end, I will be implementing new guidelines for internet usage within the school." There was a collective hush in the hall. Harry exchanged a glance with Hermione and Ron. They had all suspected that something like this was coming. McGonagall cleared her throat. "From this point forward, students will be required to take part in a new initiative called Digital Detox Week. For 1 week each term, students will be expected to disconnect from all digital devices, including their tablets and enchanted screens. During this time, the focus will be on face-to-face interaction, physical activities, and of course magic." A wave of surprised whispers spread across the room. For a moment, it felt as though the entire school was collectively holding its breath. "The goal," McGonagall continued, "is not to erase the progress we've made with the internet, but to ensure that we do not lose sight of the things that make Hogwarts special, our connections with one another and our dedication to learning." Harry couldn't help but smile. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. It was a reminder that while the digital world could be powerful, there was still value in the real world, something that couldn't be replaced by a screen. As the assembly drew to a close, Harry found himself feeling more hopeful. Maybe Hogwarts hadn't lost its magic after all. Perhaps the key to navigating the future lay not in rejecting the internet, but in finding a way to live alongside it, without letting it take over everything that mattered. It was a journey that would take time, but Harry was ready for it. The road ahead might be uncertain, but at least he wasn't walking it alone. As the days of Digital Detox Week approached, a strange sense of anticipation hung over Hogwarts. The usual buzz of students with their enchanted devices was noticeably quieter. Conversations in the halls became more personal, more face-to-face. And for the first time in a while, students seemed to reconnect on a level that hadn't been possible when everyone was constantly distracted by the internet. The announcement from Professor McGonagall had thrown everyone off guard. The idea of disconnecting from all digital devices for an entire week was an unfamiliar and somewhat frightening prospect. Students had grown accustomed to the ease of instant messaging, online research, and the comfort of always being connected. Now they were being asked to step back, to interact with each other the old-fashioned way. For many, it felt like a challenge they weren't prepared for. Even Harry, who had often felt uneasy about the overwhelming presence of technology at Hogwarts, found the thought of going offline for a week to be unsettling. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Ron admitted one evening as they sat in the Gryffindor common room, preparing for the start of Digital Detox Week. His fingers tapped nervously against his tablet, which he had just powered down for the first time in months. "I don't know if any of us are," Hermione said, her voice tinged with uncertainty as she put her own tablet away. "It's going to be hard. I've grown so used to having access to everything I need at the touch of a button. But McGonagall's right. We've been relying on technology so much that we've forgotten how to just be present." Harry nodded, his mind swirling with mixed feelings. While he understood the importance of the initiative, he couldn't help but feel a bit apprehensive. What if the internet wasn't the problem? What if it was their own inability to find balance? And what would it be like to spend an entire week without being able to check his email, scroll through magical blogs, or keep up with Quidditch scores? But as the days passed and Digital Detox Week officially began, Harry couldn't deny that there was something refreshing about it. For the first time in months, the Great Hall was quieter during meals. Instead of students huddled over their devices, they were engaged in real conversations. The older students, who had been so immersed in the digital world, were now finding themselves reluctantly pulling back from the distractions and reconnecting with their peers. As part of the detox initiative, the school had arranged a series of activities designed to encourage face-to-face interaction. There were outdoor excursions, group study sessions, and a number of hands-on magical workshops. For the first time in ages, students were forced to put down their devices and engage with each other in the real world. The most surprising of all, however, was the Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Slytherin, which had been scheduled for that week. Without the constant digital updates or the ability to check online forums for the latest news, the excitement surrounding the match was more palpable than ever. The stands were packed with students eager to watch the game, and the roar of the crowd was louder than it had been in years. There was no virtual commentary, no live-streamed highlight reels. It was just the game, the players, and the magic of the sport. As Harry flew through the air, chasing after the golden snitch, he couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. There was something uniquely freeing about playing without the pressure of online scrutiny. It was just him and the game. No followers, no digital scoreboard, no distractions. Gryffindor won the match in a thrilling last-minute catch by Harry, and as he landed on the ground, he could see the smiles on his teammates' faces. They had worked together, relied on each other, and celebrated the victory in the most traditional way, by cheering, laughing, and clapping one another on the back. For a moment, it felt like the world outside had faded away, leaving only the magic of the game and the joy of being present. In the following days, Harry found himself enjoying the simple pleasures that had once seemed so ordinary. He spent hours in the library with Hermione, poring over books about new spells, and enjoying the quiet companionship that came with studying without the interference of social media. Ron, too, had begun to find new ways to relax without the constant need to be online. The trio had spent hours playing wizard's chess, talking about life, and for the first time in a long time, not worrying about what the world was saying about them. Even Draco Malfoy, who had once prided himself on his digital status, seemed to be affected by the week of disconnection. Harry had noticed that Draco had stopped obsessively checking his tablet between classes, and while he still carried himself with the usual arrogance, there was a slight change in his demeanor. He wasn't the same figurehead of digital superiority he had been before. It was as if the absence of the internet had reminded him that there were other ways to measure success. Of course, not everyone was happy with the changes. There were students who chafed at the idea of being cut off from their online lives, and some even attempted to sneak in their enchanted devices when no one was looking. But the overall mood at Hogwarts had shifted. People were talking more, laughing more, and for the first time in a while, they were really listening to each other. One evening, as the week neared its end, Harry sat outside on the steps of the castle, watching the sunset. The air was crisp, and the sky was streaked with shades of orange and pink. He thought about how much had changed in just a few short days. The world didn't feel smaller because they were offline. If anything, it felt bigger, full of more opportunities to connect, not just through technology, but through genuine, meaningful interactions. "Hermione," Harry said, glancing over at his friend, who had joined him on the steps, "I think I've figured something out." "What's that?" Hermione asked, her voice soft as she gazed out over the grounds. "I think we've all been going about this the wrong way," Harry said, his voice thoughtful. The internet isn't bad. It's just that we've let it take over. We've forgotten how to live without it, how to connect without it. This week has shown me that we don't need to constantly be plugged in to feel important or connected. Hermione smiled. I think you're right. The internet can be a tool, but it's not everything. There's so much more to life than what we see online. Harry nodded, a feeling of clarity settling in his chest. The internet had brought both opportunities and challenges, but it was up to them to find a way to use it wisely. They didn't need to abandon it entirely, but they couldn't let it consume them either. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a final glow over the grounds, Harry felt a sense of peace that had been absent for a long time. Hogwarts was more than just a school. It was a place where friendships were formed, where memories were made, and where magic was not just learned, but lived. And as long as they held on to that, no amount of technology could take it away. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but Harry felt ready. He wasn't just going to survive the digital age. He was going to thrive in it, with his friends by his side and the magic of Hogwarts at his back. The effects of Digital Detox Week were still being felt weeks later, long after students had returned to their screens, and the internet had once again become a prominent part of daily life at Hogwarts. But something fundamental had shifted. Students had learned to reconnect with the real world, to find joy in face-to-face conversations, and to appreciate moments without the need to document every second of their lives online. It wasn't that technology had been rejected. Far from it. It was simply that they had found a new balance. Harry, Hermione, and Ron were adjusting to this balance as well. While they still used their enchanted devices for studying, research, and staying in touch with friends outside of school, there was now a conscious effort to disconnect when it wasn't necessary. It wasn't about abandoning the internet. It was about not letting it control them. One afternoon, as they sat in the library, Hermione was absorbed in a particularly difficult textbook, while Ron was scrolling through the latest Quidditch scores on his tablet. Harry, however, was doing something he hadn't done in ages. He was looking out the window. The view of the grounds was peaceful, with the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant sound of birds singing. It reminded him of the quiet moments they had spent during Digital Detox Week, when everything had slowed down and allowed them to really notice the world around them. Have you guys noticed that it feels quieter lately? Harry asked, turning to look at his friends. Hermione looked up from her book, adjusting her glasses. What do you mean? I don't know, Harry said, tapping his fingers lightly against the wooden table. It just feels like people are talking more. Really talking. Like before, everyone was always glued to their devices, but now it feels like people are actually connecting. Ron snorted. It's probably because there's less to gossip about online. Without all the trending posts and updates, people have to actually have conversations. Hermione gave him an amused look. That's not all it is, Ron. I think we've all learned something important. We're not just relying on the internet for validation anymore. Ron raised an eyebrow. Validation. You know, Hermione said, a thoughtful expression on her face. Before, everyone was constantly trying to get likes, shares, and views. People were obsessed with their online images. But now it feels like we're seeing each other for who we really are. Harry couldn't argue with that. There had been a time when he had felt caught up in the online frenzy, comparing himself to others or worrying about what others thought of him. But now, with the pressure dialed down, he felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't just about the internet anymore. It was about real relationships. The kind where you didn't need to have a perfect digital persona to be liked or accepted. In fact, some of the most genuine conversations Harry had had in recent weeks had been with people who were, until then, just names on a screen. He had begun to appreciate the moments where people spoke without editing themselves, without worrying about how they appeared to the rest of the world. As Harry was mulling over this thought, he suddenly noticed a familiar face across the library. Draco Malfoy was sitting at one of the tables, his eyes fixed on his tablet. But there was something different about the way he was sitting. His usual air of superiority was absent, replaced by an almost pensive expression. Do you think Draco's okay? Ron asked, following Harry's gaze. Hermione's eyebrows furrowed as she watched Malfoy for a moment. I'm not sure. He's been a bit quieter lately. It wasn't that Harry felt sorry for Draco. After all, they had never been friends. But something about seeing him looking so isolated made Harry pause. Malfoy had always been confident, a master of online influence, but now, after Digital Detox Week, he seemed like he was struggling to find his place. That's new, Harry said softly. I think he's having trouble adjusting, Hermione said, her voice carefully measured. Before, he was always so focused on the digital world. He was always trying to show off. But now that things have slowed down, he might be feeling lost. Maybe, Ron agreed, though there was a slight trace of suspicion in his tone. But do we really want to start feeling sorry for him? Harry hesitated before replying. I don't know. Maybe he just needs time to figure out who he is without the internet defining him. As the days passed, Harry couldn't shake the thought of Draco's quiet demeanor. There was something almost vulnerable about it. He wasn't used to seeing Malfoy without his usual bravado, without his carefully curated online presence. Harry realized that, much like the rest of them, Draco had become so caught up in the digital world that he had lost touch with the real one. And now that that world was no longer so easily accessible, he was struggling to keep his footing. One evening, Harry found himself in the Great Hall, waiting for dinner to start. As he passed by the Slytherin table, he noticed Draco sitting by himself, staring at his empty plate. It was a stark contrast to the usual crowd of admirers that surrounded him. Harry felt a twinge of empathy for him, though he quickly dismissed it. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but something urged him to do something he wouldn't normally do. Without thinking, Harry walked over to Draco's table and cleared his throat. Draco's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. What do you want, Potter? I thought I'd ask if you're all right, Harry said awkwardly. He was surprised by his own words, but there it was. Draco blinked, his surprise turning into something else, a mix of confusion and wariness. What's that supposed to mean? Harry shrugged, not sure how to explain it. I just noticed you've been quiet lately. You seem a bit off. Draco's lips curled into a sneer, but it lacked its usual bite. I don't need your pity, Potter. I wasn't offering pity, Harry replied, trying to keep the conversation light. I just thought, maybe we're all in this together. It's not easy adjusting to all this. Draco stared at Harry for a long moment, clearly weighing his response. Finally, he looked down at his empty plate again. Maybe you're right, he muttered, almost too quietly for Harry to hear. For a moment, there was silence. Then Draco stood up, his usual arrogance returning. Whatever. I don't have time for this. He turned and walked off, but Harry couldn't help but feel that something had shifted between them. It wasn't a full conversation, but it was progress. Later that night, as Harry lay in bed, he thought about the brief encounter. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was a reminder that even people like Draco, who seemed so certain of their place in the world, could be struggling in ways that no one could see. The internet had connected them all in ways they never imagined, but it had also created new struggles. Draco's digital echo was just one example of the growing pains that Hogwarts was going through in the age of technology. And maybe, just maybe, they could all help each other find their way back to something real, something meaningful beyond the screen. As the weeks went on, the buzz about the Digital Detox Week began to fade, but the changes it had instilled in Hogwarts remained. Harry, Hermione, and Ron continued to make a conscious effort to limit their time online, preferring to interact with their peers and focus on their studies. It was becoming clear that, while technology had its place, it was far from the center of their lives now. And for Harry, this new balance felt like the key to something he hadn't fully realized he'd been missing: genuine connection. The shift at Hogwarts wasn't just confined to students, either. Professors seemed to notice the change in their classrooms as well. For the first time in ages, students were engaging more with each other in discussions, sharing ideas without the distraction of magical devices buzzing or flashing. Even Snape, who usually seemed completely indifferent to such things, had started incorporating more group activities in his potions lessons. One day, as Harry walked across the courtyard between classes, he spotted Draco Malfoy standing near the edge of the fountain, looking unusually pensive. The last time Harry had seen Draco like this had been just after the Digital Detox Week, and it seemed that the quiet reflection had continued. Draco was still alone, but there was a subtle change in the way he carried himself now, less aloof and more contemplative. Harry hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should approach. He had seen Draco from a distance, watching as the Slytherins seemed to interact with fewer people. and it struck Harry that Malfoy had become a bit of a social outcast, whether by choice or circumstance. It reminded him of the way he used to feel before he had truly bonded with Ron and Hermione. Was Draco going through something similar? Taking a deep breath, Harry decided to take the plunge. He walked toward Draco, trying not to look as awkward as he felt. As he got closer, Draco glanced up, his eyes narrowing as he saw Harry approaching. "What do you want now, Potter?" Draco's voice was sharper than usual, but there was a slight edge of tiredness behind it. I just wanted to ask if you're doing okay," Harry said, his words feeling a bit out of place, but they were genuine. Draco raised an eyebrow, looking genuinely puzzled. "Doing okay? What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean," Harry faltered, trying to find the right words. "You've been kind of quiet. I just wondered if everything's all right." For a moment, Draco seemed caught off guard. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to someone asking him about his well-being. After a long pause, he sighed, as if trying to push away the vulnerability. "Potter, you have no idea what it's like," Draco muttered, looking away from Harry as if the very act of acknowledging it made him uncomfortable. "Yeah, I probably don't," Harry admitted. "But I know what it's like to feel like you're disconnected, or like everything's changing, and you're not sure what to do with it." Draco glanced up at Harry, his eyes sharp but with an underlying exhaustion that Harry hadn't seen before. There was no mockery in Draco's gaze now, no disdain, just a weariness that seemed unfamiliar. "I suppose it's not easy to have everything you've always known suddenly upended," Draco said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You get so used to things, people, places, routines, and then one day, it's all different." Harry didn't respond immediately. He wasn't entirely sure where the conversation was going, but something about Draco's openness caught him off guard. It wasn't the bravado or sneers that Harry was used to. This was something more raw. "I think everyone felt that way during Digital Detox Week," Harry said after a beat. "The idea that everything we relied on, every device, every connection, just stopped. It wasn't easy." Draco looked at him then, his gaze no longer cold but searching. "You're right. It wasn't easy. I didn't realize how much I'd let it all define me. The constant need to be seen, to be recognized. When that stopped, it was like I didn't know who I was anymore." Harry felt a flash of understanding. He had always known Draco to be obsessed with his image, both online and off, but he never truly understood how much it had affected him until now. Like so many others, Draco had become reliant on his digital identity to validate his place in the world. And when that was taken away, the emptiness left behind was hard to fill. "I think a lot of people went through something similar," Harry said softly. "We were all so used to being online, to being connected at all times, that we forgot what it was like to just be ourselves without the need to perform." Draco's expression softened, though just slightly. "I suppose it's hard to let go of something that's been a part of you for so long." Harry nodded in agreement. "Yeah, but it's also kind of freeing. To realize that we don't have to be online to be important, or to matter. I think that's what Digital Detox Week taught me. We don't need constant validation." Draco seemed to mull this over for a moment before he spoke again, his voice quieter. "Maybe that's what I've been missing. The real connections, the ones that don't come with a like button." There was an unspoken understanding between them now, something Harry had never expected. Draco had always been the embodiment of the digital age's obsession with status, but beneath that exterior, he was just as human as anyone else, searching for connection, for meaning, for a sense of belonging. "I think we're all still figuring it out," Harry said after a long pause. "But we're getting there. Maybe we can start by just being real with each other." Draco looked at Harry for a long moment before giving a curt nod. "We'll see, Potter." As Harry turned to leave, he felt a strange sense of accomplishment. The conversation with Draco hadn't been a breakthrough, but it had been a start, one that Harry hadn't thought was possible before. He had seen a side of Draco Malfoy that was human, vulnerable, and in search of something deeper than status and recognition. Maybe, just maybe, they were both on the same journey now. The rest of the afternoon was spent with Harry lost in thought, reflecting on his conversation with Draco. The world had changed in ways that none of them could have predicted, and the digital age had brought both progress and pitfalls. But if there was one thing Hogwarts had taught him, it was that true connection, real, meaningful connection, wasn't something that could be measured by likes, shares, or followers. It was something that had to be felt, understood, and nurtured. And Harry was beginning to believe that, in the end, that was the most powerful magic of all.